Hello, welcome to 21 This Week. I'm Susan Heltemes, filling in for Casey Aiken. Coming up next, immigration came up front and center in Montgomery County this week. Court ruling on sanctuary cities, census question on citizenship, and gubernatorial candidates and tax returns. We are joined today by an astute panel of Montgomery County insiders. Elbridge James, past president of Progressive Maryland, independent activist Uncapher, Democratic feminist Lynn Olson, and former Maryland Assistant Secretary for Business Bill Askinazi. Stay tuned for these topics and parting shots next. This week, the Montgomery County Council introduced a special appropriation to fund legal representation for residents detained because of deportation proceedings, and a hearing on that legislation will be held on May 1st at 7:30 p.m. in the Rockville County County Council building. The $373,957 would be used to help Montgomery County residents for legal representation who are at or below the federal poverty level of $12,140 for an individual or $25,100 for a family of four. Robin, since the day the president announced his candidacy, he has constantly scorned immigrants, and his administration has worked tirelessly to deport them regardless of their story. Is this appropriation the right thing to do?
I think this is the most American thing that a person can have. All of us take for granted the idea that if we cannot afford a lawyer, that one will be appointed for us. To have a court where people are possibly going back to be killed in a country and not have a situation where they can be represented by an attorney is absolutely appalling. It is even more appalling to think that these people frequently have difficulty with English. And you know, anybody knows that when you're in a court, you need a lawyer to help you out. This goes double for children, and right now you have a situation where you have unrepresented children in these courts. So I think this is just, I don't even think it has much to do with immigration. I think it just has to do with what Americans expect of any court system.
Well, now, Bill, funds have already been cut by the U.S. Justice Department for this very same aid. As a businessman in a county that might spend $11 million for public funding of candidates this year, is this $373,957 expenditure an appropriate use of taxes?
I've been a member of the Maryland Bar for over 30 years. There's some fantastic pro bono committees, including immigration committees. The court appoints these talented lawyers to represent immigrants and others. So it's not the question of whether it's a noble service to protect immigrants. Of course it is. The question is it a proper use of taxpayer dollars? And it is absolutely not. We have problems in the county that deal with education, crumbling roads, crumbling infrastructure, and there's an arbitrary use of taxpayer dollars dedicated to a specific effort. That's incorrect and it's wrong. It's telling me, in a way, how my elected officials would like to help a specific group when the help is already there. You just have to go and look for it. And there's a lot of groups and talented lawyers who can offer that help. So there's two different questions. One is the cause, which we agree with, to represent people ably and effectively, but the other is where that money comes from. And I wholeheartedly disagree that it's the government's role to select taxpayer dollars that can be used elsewhere for that effort.
But these
well,
are
Lynn,
folks.
just a minute. Lynn, critics are already stating that this is yet another example of left-wing activists spending money on undocumented immigrants that do not merit any more county dollars. So how are you going to respond to that?
Well, first of all, I want to say that I disagree with Bill. I think it is a legitimate use of taxpayer dollars. And I'd also like to say that these people are our residents. They live in our county, they work in our county, they pay taxes, they take part in civic life. You know, and they, as Robin says, they need due process. It's too complicated, I think, to just count on pro bono. And I also think that right now, they don't have a lot of them don't have attorneys. They go to Baltimore Immigration Court. And what the Baltimore Immigration Court has shown, what studies have shown, is that deportation relief is quadrupled if they have an attorney. So I think that definitely I don't think it's a big price to pay to be able to give them due process.
Okay, now, Elbridge, the stories about this are heartbreaking, about parents being torn from their children, minors going to court without legal representation as young as 4, 5, 6 years old, and DACA students losing their rights. This seems like too little too late, perhaps. What's your take on this effort to give this money?
Well, I agree with my colleagues about a lot of these folks have paid money into the system through working and paying taxes. We know of veterans that have been deported and who served this country. And it's funny, they served the country and we knew where they were and didn't deport them. But as soon as they got out to service, we deported them. So there was something wrong there. But also the problem of that putting youth, separating youth from their parents is just something as a society we cannot tolerate. The other point, Bill, and I understand about the pro bono, but I think also from your colleagues, they have said they may start to be getting overworked. And so this is where there's some relief came in and asked for some of these things. We got jurisdictions from New York, Pennsylvania, and other jurisdictions that have been putting money into these kind of efforts so that in fact we can have an ability to keep communities together. And it's not a guarantee that they won't be deported, but we allow them some sort of due process and some sort of ability.
Sure.
I have a practical issue with your comments. The practical issue that $367,000, as we can both appreciate, is a pittance with the number of. So who's to decide whether one of those immigrants gets a qualified lawyer that's paid for, or who's getting maybe somewhat lesser representation? So it becomes a due process issue.
But as I said, they have to be below 200% below the
I get
poverty
it,
level.
but the monies, though, is not enough monies in the pot to fairly represent
But yes,
everybody.
there is. Yes, there is. I was having to have lunch today with Councilman Sidney Katz. And Sidney told me that right now we're only talking about 75 to 80 cases that are right now pending in Baltimore Immigration Court. Is not a lot. But what we're looking down the pike at is the expiration of temporary protective status for the Hondurans and Salvadorans, which may cost more money.
Which will probably be thousands of cases. We can all agree on that, much more than 70 or 80. So the question then returns to the fairness, and there's a due process argument. Who gets the adequate representation and who gets the short straw?
Well, do you know they've now also brought up that Vietnamese may be sent back? But yeah, I just learned today on the Kojo Nambi show that the District of Columbia has put $500,000 in a pot for this very issue. But not only is it going to be used for help in courts, but they're also using the money to help people in their process to become legal citizens. So it's a two-part. But what does that say? We're spending $11 million, though, Bill, on getting a county council persons elected. And this is a small pittance, and Bill is right. They pay taxes, and they get very little for it.
Well, the other thing to keep in mind in terms of finance is if they are sitting in jail because they can't get out on bond because they don't have a lawyer, you've got a family that's losing income that may need more state support and more help just because they don't have an attorney to get out.
It's so easy to say they and to create a monolithic immigrant group. It's not a they. Within the immigrant group and undocumented immigrants, there are people who are here legally, who've been here for a long time. There are people who are not here legally, who are criminal elements. There are gang members here. So you can't say they. And who's to determine who gets those dollars among that great group?
It's going to an immigration, it's called Karen, I believe, and they get money from all over, and this is going to help Montgomery County persons only. But we're only talking deportation hearings. It has nothing to do if they get caught snitching, candy bars at 7-Eleven. It's only for deportation hearings. So, but there are people, yes.
I unfortunately had an associate whose wife was stolen by the Bush administration. He's a United States citizen, and they had to go to Baltimore for the hearing. She stayed beyond her legal status but they were dating at the time, and she started going through the process and was going through the immigration services to be kept aware of what was happening. And they told her to go. They got married. Told her to go to Baltimore with your husband, but without a lawyer. He asked, where's my wife? And they let him go to the window as she was being led handcuffs on the bus.
This is happening everywhere right now, and it is a terrible thing. And I bet on May 1st there is going to be a large crowd in that hearing room when we talk about it. But we're going to be back after this short break. Stay tuned. I bet that room.
Oh, look, a redhead. Staring contest. You still got it.
I know.
Come alive with the forest.
The dad was cute.
You were looking right at us.
Visit discovertheforest.org to find a forest near you.
On Thursday, a panel of 3 judges appointed by Republican presidents in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 7th District in Chicago ruled unanimously against the Trump administration's effort to withhold money from sanctuary cities. In a 35-page ruling, Judge Ilana Rovner, a Reagan appointee, offered a rebuke of the administration in an opinion that read like a tutorial on the separation of powers and used the word tyranny that you don't hear often in legal opinions. Some officials in Montgomery County were concerned that some federal dollars were going to be taken away due to the administration's effort to cut funding for sanctuary efforts. Bill, now as a Republican lawyer, you are well aware that the Republican-led Senate and House have not taken action against this and many other actions of the president, even though many are personally appalled on both sides of the aisle. Will this separation of powers decision by the court, do you think it's going to thwart the efforts of the administration?
Look, this is a classic confrontation of the separation of powers within our constitutional framework. It has appeared before, and it'll appear again. You've got a president who has a certain point of view, who believes and invokes the clause that a chief executive can secure our borders and the chief executive can take certain powers. And then you have Congress, which controls the purse strings and the money.
And make the laws.
And make the laws. So you will have that conflict. Now, of course, there's political overtones on top of the legalese. So it's never going to be easy as to this push and pull as to who can do what. And I think that ultimately the Supreme Court is going to really decide whether Congress, if a Republican Congress passes a law that deprives sanctuary cities of funds, whether the Supreme Court's going to make a decision whether that can happen. I do think it's going to go to the Supreme Court, and there's going to be a confrontation with it. But it's not surprising that the president would push his agenda a certain way, and that the Congress would either fund him or on the other side of the aisle, rebuke him.
And mostly they've done nothing.
Yes.
And therein is the vacuum.
It's
that
a midterm elections.
Well, and there is the vacuum where the president has taken over. So in the First Amendment to the Constitution, Article 2, it states that an enumeration, or you may refer to it as a census, shall be made every 10 years. Attorney General Brian Frosh has filed a lawsuit on behalf of the state of Maryland to block inclusion of a citizenship question in the 2020 census. The Trump administration added the question that has not been asked since 1990, a point that the White House has repeatedly lied about to the press. Now, Elbridge, per Frosh, the addition of the citizenship question is an attempt to intimidate individuals and could result in the loss of federal funds for Maryland and Montgomery County and derive our state of fair representation in Congress. It's already difficult to get people to complete the form. And this might even worse so in Montgomery County, where 1/3 or 33% of the population is foreign-born. What do you think the courts are gonna do, Elbridge?
I hope they remove that citizenship question. And it was 1950, not 1990. It's been that long ago since we've asked about citizenship.
Yeah.
But one of the bigger points is that with the census taking, I participated in that. It is a local event. And a lot of times when you have local folks asking the question, you get better response. If you take the citizenship or you keep the citizenship part in it, then their hands are sort of tied as to when they look at someone who might be legal versus undocumented. And those questions really then discourage participation. We've had that problem in the 1980s with the black community and the early Latino and African community. Believe it or not, you have some of that problem where you have large Eastern Europeans in the United States with regard to their citizenship. So it's not just a person of color question. It is in fact a legitimate question across the board, all races and ethnicities, with regard to coming to the melting pot, for better opportunity.
No, wait,
Bill.
just a quick comment.
Okay.
Don't you think that there's a true legitimate government interest in knowing whether someone's a citizen or not? They're not asking your religion, they're not asking your personal preferences. It's, are you a citizen or not? And if you believe that it's not just for the nefarious purpose of, hey, gotcha, you're not a citizen, there's legitimate issues as to infrastructure, whether these people, employment issues, family, could you address that? I don't quite.
May I say something
Yeah.
first? I've worked on projects with the IRS, and there is a wall that comes down, and IRS documents, the census documents rather, are supposed to be confidential and not shared with anybody else in government. I think there is a legitimate concern based on the court case that just came down that this administration may try to go across that wall and get this information, and that ICE could use it. And I think that's a valid concern. And so I think therein is part of the problem. And it does say an enumeration of everyone. And back then it meant it took in the slaves. And I saw the document, a census document of my father, and he was an infant, and they said he didn't speak English.
But it begs the question, because if non-citizens are included in the census, and the census populations by state feed into federal dollar allocations, you can unfairly allocate monies to states that don't have as many citizens as you think they have.
But wait a minute.
But we haven't been
But
asking
they have
that question.
taxpayers.
They have taxpayers, yes.
And that's the important part.
Well, some are I think that if you don't ask the question, you don't know how many are taxpayers and how
But
many
that
aren't.
shouldn't have anything
Citizenship
to...
has nothing to do with taxpaying.
The methodology for the census is antiquated as it is. We don't necessarily get a good number, and we all know that. It's in the Constitution that we have to do it this way.
No, actually,
So
they work so hard.
they
is
do
a
work,
pretty good
no,
number.
but it's not as good a number as probably if we use scientific methods instead.
But you know what? They go out to
excuse me.
homeless
In other
shelters.
words, if you want to know how many undocumented people are in the United States, there are better ways to find out other than asking people on the census forms, which scares people. There's lots of other ways to find out whether or not you have undocumented people in a particular area.
And the larger issue is that the president has created a climate of fear among immigrants to this country,
For
whether they're
everything.
citizens or not citizens.
And it
this is just adding to it. And it's not. There's no benefit to it.
And it
we may
also
lose
makes a
benefits.
difference in Congress, in terms of representation. If you suddenly don't get accurate numbers, there are parts of this country where the representation to Congress is going to get cut. In places like Texas and California, they could lose lots of seats in Congress if people decided, you know, that they weren't going to fill it out. But I must say, the census works very hard. They go door to door. They go to homeless shelters and on the streets. And it will be interesting to see how this goes forward. And I must say that Brian Frosch there's like 10 or 12 other states that went in on this. So it isn't just Maryland. So gubernatorial candidate Rich Madaleno released his tax forms this week and challenges his opponents and Governor Hogan to do likewise in the following days. Few of the Democrats have agreed to do so, but the governor has not yet responded. Robin, should candidates for governor and the governor release their tax data?
Absolutely, why not? I think it sets a good example for lots of people. And I have to say that I do think that, with the exception of our current president, generally speaking, peer pressure works pretty well. If one side has done it, the other side does feel that need to do it, except apparently with the current administration. And I do think it's a very good idea, because right now a number of conflicts of interest that we're seeing in the government are so appalling and so upsetting that I don't think it's a bad idea to look at somebody's basic financial situation if they're going to run.
Okay, now wait a minute. Just first, Lynn, speaking of taxes, should a law be passed in Maryland that mandates this measure? And I should add, too, maybe at the federal level.
Well, here I'm going to fall into the classic liberal stereotype: pass more laws. Actually, I do think that had we had that law at the federal level in 2016, we wouldn't be looking at the president that we have today. So I'm definitely in favor of passing it at both, and might as well do it at the state level as well.
Do you have a problem with that?
No, but I'll play a devil's advocate position. I ran for office several times. People on this panel probably have too. There are enough impediments to running for office. A lot of people believe that what they make, what they're living, what their tax return shows is private information. Wouldn't it not discourage otherwise qualified candidates, another impediment on there, from running or deciding to run if it's mandatory that you have to disclose?
Well,
it's a personal decision.
But you know what? I serve on a board in the county, and I have to do a financial disclosure thing every year. Well, it is different, but you know what? If you want to be, and I'm not saying that if you have an elected dog catcher, and there only happens to be one elected dog catcher in the whole country, I think it's New Hampshire. But anyway, if you are a county executive, maybe, or at least governor and president, you are running a whole state. We talk about transparency. I think if you want to be governor, I mean, doesn't that make sense that you have a sense of...
No, I understand the other argument. I get it. I get it.
Wait a
I'm
minute.
just saying.
Let's put this in perspective. Yeah, we like the tax returns. Am I going to go through a legislative process to mandate it, knowing the shenanigans and the back and forth that's going to take up our time versus other critical issues that need to be addressed? Probably wouldn't. Would I like to see a law? Yeah. But how high is it on our agenda? Not high.
I think that, from what I've read and heard, that on the federal level, if there is a change in Congress in the fall, I think it's going to be pretty high.
Because of the current person.
For Congress and the Senate, I think it makes a great deal of sense. Because we pay Congress a decent salary,
citizens. And you know what?
We should know
I
what their
have to cut you
financial
off because
situation is.
we're out of here. We're going to be right back with parting shots.
Don't ignore the subtext. It's on us to intervene in sexual assault. Because we can. Take the pledge at itsonus.org.
And now with parting shots, we're going to start with Elbridge.
And they said the children will lead us. And I think in the next decade, we're going to see more youth advocacy and activism, and that X generation or Y generation or whatever are really going to start to push themselves into our public and political lives. I like what our youth are doing with regard to gun legislation. I wish they, in fact, would get on the immigration issue also. I think that will come. I just like how our youth and our children are stepping up.
Okay, Robin.
Kensington is about to have its annual Day of the Book on Saturday, and it's in Old Town. I think anything, there are going to be 100 authors there, and I think anything that celebrates books here in Montgomery County is a great thing to do.
Okay, Lynn, your first one, my fellow Minnesotan. What do you have to say?
Currently, Maryland has no women in its congressional delegation. This has happened as a result of Mikulski stepping down a couple of years ago. We have a wonderful candidate running for Congress in the 6th District, Delegate Aruna Miller. It is time to close ranks behind her, and I would like to call on Chris Van Hollen and Jamie Raskin to endorse Aruna Miller now.
Okay, Bill.
Today is 420. 420 is a celebration of medicinal cannabis. It has helped thousands of people across the country, and it's about time we have federal legislation not only protecting those people, but making the federal laws prohibiting it or it obsolete. So celebrating today of the power of the medicine and the healing of the country, 420, I salute everybody who supports it.
Okay, that could be on the list too if there's a change in Congress in November. So I want to thank everybody for coming today. I want to thank the panel and all of our viewers for joining us each week for Montgomery County's Hardest Political Talk Show 21 this week. See you next time. I'm Susan Heltemes, and bye for now.